The mysterious culture called the Mound Builders occupied most of the Midwest east of the Mississippi and along the Mississippi River Valley. The question is, who were these people? And as white settlers began to move into the United States, they buried the truth about this mysterious mound culture. In fact, pioneers and early archaeologists credited other distant civilizations, not Native Americans, with building these sophisticated complexes. And that couldn't be further from the truth. In tonight's expose, we're going to show you that the Central American culture called the Mayans proliferated all the way north into North America towards the end of their culture, and they were, in fact, the mound builders. And the end of the Mayan Empire corresponds to around the time of the end of the mound builders. Now, the peak, around 1100 to 1200 AD, the largest city north of Mexico was Cahokia. And we're looking at an artist's representation of Cahokia now. It was sitting in what is now southern Illinois, across the Mississippi River from St. Louis. The city is estimated to be built around 1050 AD and occupied through 1400 AD, the same time frame where the quote-unquote Anasazi were proliferating in my region in the desert Southwest. Cahokia had a peak population of between 25,000 and 50,000 people. It's now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And Cahokia was composed of 3 boroughs. Cahokia, downtown, which is here with the Pyramid Complex, East St. Louis, and St. Louis, each connected via waterways and walking trails that extended across the Mississippi River floodplain for some 20 square kilometers. Its population consisted of agriculturalists who grew large amounts of maize and craft specialists who made amazing works of art, pots, shell jewelry, arrow points, flint clay figurines, and more. And some of the work they've created is some of the most unexplainable and advanced stuff in archaeology today. They even had copper plates that were very reminiscent of the cultures in Mexico and Central America. And caches, massive caches at Cahokia have been found of different types of spear points, obsidian, flint, and others. Here's a cache of over 1,500 points in 2 square feet. And so the area is prolific. And the mound builders were prolific. There are mounds, maybe hundreds of mounds across the region where the quote-unquote Mississippian culture lived. That's what archaeologists have dubbed this. All these names given that we are repeating here are given by white people, archaeologists, and not the natives. So none of these are the actual, in most cases, terms that should be used. Now, the city of Cahokia is one of many large earthen mound complexes that dot the landscape of the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys and across the Southeast. Despite the preponderance of archaeological evidence that these mound complexes were the work of sophisticated Native American civilizations, this rich history was obscured by the myth of the mound builders, a narrative that arose ostensibly to explain the existence of the mounds. Now, examining both the history of Cahokia and the historic myths that were created to explain it reveals the troubling role that early archaeologists played in diminishing or even eradicating the achievements of pre-Columbian civilizations on the North American continent. Just as the U.S. government was expanding westward by taking control of Native Native American lands, the narrative was being rewritten. Now, today it's difficult to grasp the size and complexity of Cahokia because of a number of reasons. The suppression of information, the dumbing down of humanity, lying directly to the public, misinformation. But now we have LIDAR and other techniques that are blowing open all of the false narratives. Cahokia was composed of about 190 mounds and platforms. Ridgetop and circular shapes aligned to a planned city grid, oriented 5 degrees east of north. This alignment, according to Tim Pocketot, professor of anthropology at the University of Illinois, is tied to the summer solstice sunrise and the southern maximum moonrise, which we refer to as the lunar standstill. Orienting Cahokia to the movement of both the sun and the moon. This is an archaeoastronomical city. Absolutely fantastic. Neighborhood houses, causeways, plazas, and mounds were all intentionally aligned to this city grid. Now imagine yourself walking out from Cahokia's downtown. On your journey, you would encounter neighborhoods of rectangular, semi-subterranean houses, central hearth fires, storage pits, and smaller community plazas, interspersed with ritual and public buildings. We know Cahokia's population was diverse, and we'll get to the science in just a moment, with people moving to and from this city across the mid-continent and even further, likely speaking different dialects and bringing with them some of their other ways of life. The largest mound at Cahokia was Monk's Mound, a 4-terraced platform mound about 100 feet high that served as the city's central point. And here is a picture of it today. The mound is actually a series of hundreds of years of construction, where other smaller pyramid complexes were built up over a period of time to reach this grandeur. Now, atop its summit sat one of the largest rectangular buildings ever constructed at Cahokia, and maybe North America at the time. And it likely served as a ritual place. And here you can see the top of Monk's Mound and the platforms in a reconstruction at its peak. Now, in front of Monk's Mound, here are several other pyramid complexes, but what we want to draw your attention to is the big open plain here, with all the people surrounding it. Kind of interesting, isn't it? In front of Monk's Mound was a large open plaza that held a chunk yard to play the popular sport of chunky. This game, watched by thousands of spectators, was played by 2 large groups who would run across the plaza lobbing spears and rolling stone discs. The goal of the game was to land their spear at the point where the disc would stop rolling. In addition to the chunk yard, upright marker posts and additional platform mounds were situated along the plaza edges. As you can see here, 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 in all of these locations. In fact, over a half a dozen plateaus. Ridgetop burial mounds were also placed along Cahokia's central organizing grid, marked by the Rattlesnake Causeway and along the city limits. You can see the Rattlesnake Causeway cutting directly across the city here, a road that was built intentionally to make it easy to access all of the locations perpendicular to the floodplain. Now, Cahokia was built rapidly, with thousands of people coming together to participate in its construction, and it lasted for hundreds of years. As far as archaeologists know, there were no forced labor used to build these mounds. Instead, This civilization of Native Americans came together for big feasts and gatherings and celebrations and sport, and celebrated the construction of their mounds each and every time. The splendor of the mounds was visible to the first white people who described them. But they thought that the American Indian, known to early white settlers, could not have built any of these great earthworks that dotted the mid-continent. So the question then became, who built the mounds? And the fairy tales began. Early archaeologists working to answer the question of who built the mounds attributed them to the Toltecs, and they would be partially correct. They also attributed them to the Vikings, the Welshmen, the Hindus, and many other cultures. It seemed that any other group other than the American Indian could serve as the likely architect of these great earthworks. The impact of this narrative led to some of the early America's most rigorous archaeology, as the quest to determine where these mounds came from became salacious conversation pieces for America's middle and upper class. The Ohio earthworks, such as the Newark earthworks, a National Historic Landmark located just outside of Newark, Ohio. This is one example, and John Fitch, builder of America's first steam-powered boat, said that the structure was a military-style fortification. This contributed to the notion that prior to the Native Americans, highly skilled warriors of unknown origin had populated the North American continent. This was particularly salient in the Midwest and Southeast, where earthen mounds from the archaic Hopewell and Mississippian time periods crisscrossed the mid-continent. These landscapes and the mounds built upon them quickly became places of fantasy, where speculation as to their origin rose from the grassy prairies to the vast floodplains, just like the mounds themselves, according to Gordon Sayre. The tales of the origins of the mounds were often based in fascination with antiquity and architecture, as ruins of a distant past, or as natural manifestations of the landscape. When William Bartram and others recorded local Native American narratives of the mounds, they seemingly corroborated these mythical origins of the mounds. According to Bartram's early journals, published in 1791, the Creek and the Cherokee, who lived around the mounds, attributed their construction to the ancients, many ages prior to their arrival and possession of this country. Now that is true, because the same ancients are out here at the same time, and they are called the Anasazi. Now, the only problem is that the Anasazi out here mimic the Maya. And the mound builders also have very close affinity and similarity to Maya culture. And the Mayan civilization began flourishing, well, quite a long time ago. In fact, the Maya civilization is posited to have begun at least in 2000 BC, maybe earlier, based on some of the LiDAR studies we've shared on the channel. But nonetheless, the Maya culture in Central America grew and grew into the modern era. And why, if they were growing so rapidly, why wouldn't there be outlier groups that went to maybe inhabit other regions of the continent? And in fact, I think that's what they did. Take a look at this picture. Well, before we get there, okay, now let's just go on with this narrative. This is a mask of the rain god Chak. This is the facade of a pyramid in North Acropolis in Mayan ruins located in Tikal, Guatemala. Take a good look. And we're going to look here. This is the Adena Mound in Chillicothe, Ohio, where they discovered the Adena pipestone. Now, Let's take a look at the adornments on the ear, the mouth, the headdress, and relate it to the Adena pipestone. It is exactly the same effigy, almost to a T. Even the secondary holes up here are still visible, which may represent this. And the square hat. And the ear garments are exactly the same. And this would be like ear piercings that spread your earlobe. So why are the people in the Mound culture, the Adena culture in Ohio, at the same time that Cahokia was built, the Mound builders, these cultures, why do they have the same exact artifacts? This is potentially 3,000 years old, while this is only 1,500 years old, maybe 2,000, maybe 3,000. There's no way to date this pipe. It was found in a mound. But here's where it gets interesting. A study coming out just a few years ago says that Cahokia, America's first city, was a melting pot. And they proved it studying the teeth of the people buried in the mounds. And what they found is quite spectacular. Here's the paper. Immigrants at the Mississippian polity of Cahokia, strontium isotope evidence for population movement. This is fantastic. Archaeologists have long debated the role of regional interaction in the 11th to 14th centuries at the Mississippian Cahokia city. Teeth from individuals interred in diverse mortuary locations. So they didn't just pick like one burial. They picked all types of burials inside and outside the city, all around. Rich people, poor people, fancy burials, accidental findings of burials, and including mounds within the region were analyzed and compared to local strontium isotope range to identify individuals of non-local origin. Now, 1/3 of all individuals analyzed at Cahokia were identified as non-local. And the range and variability of their strontium ratios suggest multiple places of origin. So some of them came from the desert Southwest as the Maya migrated up and north into North America. Some of them probably came directly from Mexico or Central America. But the fact is that the Mayan civilization exploded over the North American continent in every direction, as far north as Canada. And the proof, well, is in the study. This earthwork is so impressive. And some of the artistic interpretations of what the Cahokians may have looked like is very indicative of the Maya. But more importantly, the Adena pipestone is so unique an artifact made of soapstone that it is undeniable that it is Mayan. And this came from Ohio, but from the same Mound culture that inhabited most of eastern North America, that migrated from Central America thousands of years ago. And that is boom to knowledge. Comment below if you believe what we're saying or if you have problems with it. We would love to hear what your thoughts are. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Share this with like-minded people. Become a Patreon. Support the work we do. We love you. Be safe.